It is my pleasure now to share the panel, the podium here, with two of our students. Lindsay Schwaleson is a senior in international studies with a focus in foreign policy and national security, and she's also minoring in Israel studies. She was a former president of Ameripac, an Israel advocacy group on campus, and she also interned at various organizations in DC on Capitol Hill. Khalil Alsayegh is an international student from Palestine. I think he grew up in Gaza and then lived in Ramallah. He's enrolled here in the MA program in political science, concentrating on comparative politics. And he will be graduating in 2022. He actually holds a degree in theology from Bethlehem. And his interests are in Middle East politics, democratization, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My role here is actually to be as quiet as possible, because I would like to have a conversation between you and Ken Stern and the audience. But maybe to start it off, both of you can say a little bit more about yourself. Khalil, would you like to start? Just a little
Sure,
bit
yeah.
yourself.
So my name is Khalil. I'm a graduate student here, born and raised in the Gaza Strip to a family that is originally from a city called Majdal. Those few who don't know the geography of historical Palestine, the city of Majdal is located in the southern part of historical Palestine, today known as the city of Ashkelon. It's within the borders of modern state of Israel. My grandparents were displaced from their homes in 1948, moved to the Gaza Strip, started out scratch, and that's sort of the reality I was born to, shaped who I am, shaped how I look at things. I don't know a lot about the conflict over the campus. I'm new in the U.S. I came here about less than 2 years ago, and about a year and a half ago. And this is actually my first event. But I know a lot about the conflict. Not the conflict over the conflict, but the actual conflict, right? Because I lived it. And because I've studied it too. So that's sort of what I know more about. I think what he spoke about, or what the book addresses, is very important. The question of academic freedom is essential to me, because we live in an area in the Middle East where academic freedom isn't respected by these different authoritarian regimes around us, and it's something that is very challenging for people. And there is a reason why people like myself and others look up to institutions such as American University, and part of it, from my perspective, has to do with academic freedom, has to do with the fact that we can think and say whatever we want as Arabs, as Palestinians in campus. And that has been my experience in AU so far. I haven't had any issues here. I listen here and there about stuff happening to Arab students. I listen to stuff about happening to Jewish students, but I personally never experienced it, perhaps because of the lack of time I spend on campus, because I'm usually come afternoon, and then it's not, for a long time it wasn't in person, but I'm not aware of anything here. But I read online and I see the data, and it's concerning to me that such a spillover of what is happening in the Middle East, that's how I see it, is coming to here, and it's scary. Do I go on, or I just
let's give Lindsay a chance to say a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a senior here at American University, studying international studies and minoring in Israel studies. I've been very involved with the conflict on campus since my freshman year here. I would say that it's become more prevalent the last year on campus. I definitely have seen a rise in students becoming more vocal about this issue, and I think it's extremely important that we have a speaker here today to talk about how he sees academic freedom and academic speech being taught on campus. But I also think it's important that we talk about where academic freedom goes in terms of freedom of speech, and how we mix that also with understanding what our limits are and where we get with that. I've been involved with various Israel advocacy groups on campus. I was the president of Ameripac, which was a really amazing experience when I was a sophomore. And recently I've interned with the American Jewish Committee, so same area. I worked actually with the Department of Anti-Semitism a few times. and work specifically on legislation related to Black Jewish Caucus, but also a lot of different Israel-related caucuses as well, working with members of Congress. So while Khalil might not have the conflict on campus experience, I've definitely seen it firsthand. And as a graduating senior, I think that it's a good time for us all to reflect on what's been going on.
You actually mentioned, we talked about academic freedom of speech, which is very important, I believe. Even as I said before, if it's sometimes difficult, even if it hurts. You also said something about limits. I wasn't sure if that was related to. Do you both think there should be limits to what we should or should be able to say on campus?
I think in a sense, when it comes to racist language, anti-LGBTQ language, anti-Semitism, all those different areas need to have those limits. They have limits in the public sector as well. In the sense that I think that speakers should still be allowed on campus. However, I don't think that student groups need to be condemned for opposing them, and there still should be conversations around why those speakers are being brought here. So just in the way a student group might oppose someone who's racist coming to campus, a student group should also feel validated by opposing a speaker that's coming to campus who may be seen as anti-Semitic, who might be seen as anti-LGBTQ. I don't think that campuses are bringing in those speakers as often as they're bringing in speakers that can be seen as anti-Semitic. That's just something that I've been seeing. But that's kind of where I kind of disagreed a little bit with Kenneth, but that's just my...
I think I'm more in agreement with Kenneth, and I think that there is a danger when we start trying to draw the line of like, this is what you are not allowed to say. This is like anti-Semitic, or that's anti-Arab, or that's anti-Palestinian, because I think it's like, at what point this definition would change to include other stuff, and it scares me to think of that, because looking, I mean, again, I'm coming from a Middle East like perspective, looking at my region, I see things like this being manipulated all the time and used, and it scares me. However, there are cases to be made for limits from my perspective, and I think he alluded to that in his book, which is when there is an immediate danger on people's life. For example, if someone comes and say, well, let's kill all the Palestinians, right? Which is, some settlers would say stuff like that. I don't think this person should be allowed on campus. And if a Palestinian would say, oh, let's kill all Israelis or Zionists, or let's commit such attack on them, I think he shouldn't be allowed on campus too. But as long as the perspective, it has to do with ideas, even if it's offending to others, I don't think it's a problem. I will always say that the people who made me the most proud to be Palestinian and patriot are the most Zionist, and the people who challenged me the most, because they shaped who I am more. They challenged me to articulate my points better. And there is something about that. I think people have to be challenged, and being challenged and uncomfortable is very good.
Maybe that's a good point. Ken, you hear us, right? Any comments on that? I think we have to unmute you. Can we?
I mean, look, the whole question about speech on campus is very difficult, but I think there's a false dichotomy that's being set up between the idea of, you just ignore it or you prohibit it. As I was trying to articulate, there are things to do to oppose speech you find difficult or even, hurtful. The major thing that I worry about, both as a policy person and as a lawyer, and again, from where I started tonight, looking around the world, whenever you give the government the ability to define what the limitations are on speech beyond, obviously, things like libel and death threats and so forth, to an individual person or to a group where there's an exigent circumstance, but just expressing opinions and defining which ones are beyond the pale, that's a problem for democracy. And I find the ability to fight any form of hatred, anti-Semitism included, is tied to how strong our democratic institutions are and our free speech and traditions and academic freedom. If you look throughout history, there have been times where the government has tried to stop speech. In the McCarthy era, for example, there were professors who couldn't teach because they were seen as socialist or communist. Or in World War I, you had to take basically a loyalty oath. those are things that we should never go down that line of saying, where are we going to prohibit speech as long as it's, not an immediate threat, and so forth. The other thing is that I think, again, the campus is a place for ideas, and there are harmful ideas out in the world that we can actually learn from by bringing in people like Ahmadinejad was the example that I gave, but I'll give you another example too. Years ago, there was a case involving Ku Klux Klan leader, actually, who was invited into campus. And there was a big uproar, and it ended up that the speaker was allowed to speak, but off campus. But there was no real analysis of why that speaker was brought in the first place. And it was a journalism class. And the object of the lesson was to bring in a leader of a white supremacist group and train journalists. How do you interview somebody like this? And I could tell you from being a veteran of the fight against David Duke when he was almost elected to statewide office in Louisiana, journalists had no idea. They'd ask him a question, he'd charm and deflect and move on to the next thing. So it takes training. When I have in my anti-Semitism class, I usually have a student who, when we're talking about Nazism, will say basically Nazism is yucky. How could people have thought that way? And I turn around and would say to her, the chances are, if you were living there and then, you would have been a Nazi too. It's the major way that people looked at the world, as awful as we see it now. So, we need to look at why people are looking at these ideas and examine them. A campus should be a place that's more of a microscope to examine these ideas rather than to shut them out. So again, no harassment, no intimidation, no discrimination, no bullying. But ideas, even ideas that we find awful, eugenics, all those, people should be able to come in and express them, and others should be able to say why they find them revolting.
Thank you. At this point, I would like also to include our audience in this discussion. I see quite a few students here. I see some colleagues here. And maybe we can have a few other views, or views also of your experiences on campus, if you would like to share them with us. Doesn't have to sign for you to leave the room, but maybe there are some here who want to say something about this, or recent events on campus, perhaps. Anyone? Yes, please. Would you just introduce yourself? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, you get your mic. It's because there is also an audience following us over Zoom.
Yeah. So I recently, I don't know if this mic is projectable, but
Can you introduce yourself briefly, just your name?
Oh, my name's Michaela. And recently on campus there was like two big sort of speaker events. One was with, I'm definitely going to mispronounce these names because I'm terrible at pronouncing and remembering names, but one was with Schwaleson, and the other was with Muhammad al-Kurd. But the Muhammad al-Kurd event, I don't think it was canceled per se. It was like moved to a different location because of the whole like controversy regarding that. There was a lot of anger. I saw a lot on Instagram and social media, and there was a lot of debate on like to what extent like is the things he's saying considered anti-Semitic, or in what way is it protest? I guess for me, I'm just not sure where we draw the line, and one could argue arguably the same thing. A lot of people felt like the speech that Lipney, the other speaker, had was anti-Palestinian. So I guess a lot of confusion is, a lot of the ways in which we look to draw the line feel very vague to me, and I just wish there was a bit more clarity, but I understand that's a part of the debate too. But I'm rambling, but I was just wondering if anyone had thoughts on that.
No, thank you.
I'd like to say something. But yeah.
I'll go super quickly. On the Mohammed al-Kurd event, I agree. I think I was questioning a lot about where we draw the lines. Personally, I found a lot of his remarks that he was had said in previous tweets along the lines of blood libel with Jews, very anti-Semitic, and I was pretty against him coming to campus. I wasn't to the extent of asking him to to be off campus, but I know there was a big student movement that was asking for that as well. That goes along the lines with academic freedom. I know that it's not the opinion of the speaker, but I believe that there does need to be an adopted definition of anti-Semitism on campus, and it should be the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Not necessarily because we need to draw lines of what we allow and what we don't, but because of clarity for definition of what anti-Semitism is. There was a lot in the comments for the Livni event, for the Mohammed al-Kurd event, of Jewish students or other students saying this is anti-Semitism, and other students saying no, it's not, and vice versa, right? And I think that that's where we need the clarity of how do we define anti-Semitism, where is it, and where isn't it? That way we can have better, productive conversations and bring in speakers of all viewpoints, but understand when those speakers are being anti-Semitic and when they're not being anti-Semitic and when they're just being critical of Israel. Right now, I think that that line is really blurred between anti-Zionism or anti-Israel, not anti-Israel, but criticism in Israel and anti-Semitism, and we need to understand the differences so that we can better advocate for whoever we're having on campus.
Okay, let me address your question from Palestinian perspective. I'm aware of Muhammad al-Kurd, and I don't know a lot about Muhammad, but I know that he represents certain segment within the Palestinian society. I disagree with him about a lot of things. I disagree with him about his approach and stuff, but I can't imagine being Muhammad. He is in place where he is in the danger of like being, taken away from or taken out of his home in Sheikh Jarrah. He's one of the families that lives in the Sheikh Jarrah houses and all of that. So I understand where he's coming from. Do I agree with all his statements? Probably no. I would say them more wisely. I would articulate my points more. I wouldn't fall to this anti-Semitic tropes of blood label that I looked at them and it was terrifying. It's scary. If I was Jew, I would be offended. However, the problem with that, what the usually pro-Israel groups does with this, they conflict two concepts from my perspective. They conflict anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And from a Palestinian perspective, these are two different things, and I will explain why. To start with, I acknowledge that there are a lot of anti-Zionists who are anti-Semite. It's not impossible to happen, right? And if you look around you in the Arab world, there is anti-Semitism, and there are anti-Judaism and anti-Jewishness. It's not impossible, and also within the Palestinian society. But the question has to be asked, why are the Palestinians anti-Zionist? And I think one Palestinian educator who lived before the existence of Israel, he lived during the Ottoman era up until the Israeli state existence, called Khalil Sakakini, gives a good answer. He's a Palestinian educator who lived in Jerusalem and taught Arabic, and he happened to teach Arabic to one of the Zionist leaders who came to Jerusalem. And he met with him. He traveled to Europe too. He traveled to New York, and he wrote in his diary the following. He said, I actually have a deep sympathy to the Jewish cause. I meet with this Zionist leader, and I get it. I know what the white men did to them. I know what the war did to them, and I deeply sympathize, Khalil says. But he goes, but I'm anti-Zionist, and I'm against their project. And he continues, he goes, why? Because it's on my land, and it would hinder my dream. And at that time, Palestinians had this dream of greater Syria as a sort of a state. So that is the Palestinian opposition to Zionism. It's not based on anti-Semitism. Now, there are others. Some would say maybe, Husseini was. I would say maybe, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone. But there is a stream of thinking within Palestinian society in general, historically, that is anti-Zionist, not because of anti-Semitism. And until today, Palestinians haven't had the opportunity to heal from that because the occupation is continuous. And for us, we can't be demanded to just like forget completely about Zionism unless we have this opportunity of healing. And I think that within two-state solution, despite that a lot of people think of it as unjust, you could have an opportunity of healing. Any solution, but we don't have any solution right now. And that is the problem, I think.
Ken, please.
Great. So anyway, I'm intrigued by, the reactions, but let me just try to put a couple of things into perspective. Anti-Semitism at heart is really just two things that are combined, right? It's a conspiracy theory about Jews trying to harm non-Jews, and it's an explanation for what goes wrong in the world. So, the blood libel, the idea that Jews, made up the Holocaust, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, Marjorie Taylor Greene retweeting about Jews and space lasers causing forest fires. That's what anti-Semitism is at its heart. It's conspiracy theory about Jews trying to harm non-Jews and giving an explanation for what goes wrong in the world, okay? When the executive order was signed into law, Jared Kushner wrote a piece in the New York Times, an op-ed, that said it's the policy of the US government that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, first of all, the definition, which again, I was the lead drafter for, doesn't say that in so many words, but that's how people are using it. But the point is that, you know, people have legitimate reasons for being anti-Zionist, and that don't see Jewish conspiracy, and that don't see issues of Jews trying to control the world. There's a debate, you know, you heard the, you know, why a Palestinian clearly would be anti-Zionist. I have friends who are Palestinian for whom anti-Zionism is completely understandable. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And you're seeing, in fact, inside the Jewish community, a divide over this. I have a snippet in my book about how people can get together at a Hillel and have a meal, whether they're from Reform or atheist or Chabad or whatever, but not about Israel. It's so contentious. And that's part of what's happening here too, a debate internally about whether a particular attitude towards Israel is required to be seen as inside the tent. And we see, you know, Satmar Jews as being inside the tent that are anti-Zionist, but we're having a harder time seeing younger Jews, some of whom are pro-Palestinian activists, who are doing so because they believe that this, you know, abrogates what they learned from Judaism about treating the strangers. So there are all these things happening at the same time. Finally, one thing that I find difficult, which is a couple of the I think a questioner and a student both mentioned that, you know, where's the line? We need to draw a line. Well, we don't need to draw lines. You don't. I mean, people like lines because they're simple. You learn about who to exonerate and who to implicate. And issues around Israel and Palestine, issues around Zionism and so forth are messy. There's a lot of gray. The Jewish star is a symbol of the Jewish religion. The Jewish star is also on the Israeli flag. There are lots of things that we can't put in these neat buckets and say, okay, let's define it. And especially on a campus, we should be examining them, not saying which is on which side and which we shouldn't have. Which can use the definitions, I teach them and we talk about them, but they shouldn't be used as a way to limit speech on a campus, quite the opposite.
Just to respond, I respectfully disagree in terms of the need for clarity on the definition of anti-Semitism. The problem is that on campus, most college students don't deal with this every single day, and most college students don't study this topic every single day. And when moments like these events arise and anti-Semitism is thrown around in calling people anti-Semitic or telling people they're not anti-Semitic and so on and so forth, that's where we need the clarity. And that's where either we could have documents that we can bring up that are verified and signed onto that we can use for clarity, or else we're just going to keep guessing. We're going to have these questions of why is this speaker being contested? Why are we so against this person? Or why are we so for this person? And why are we bringing them on campus? And I think that's where we need a definition of anti-Semitism, not to be a hard line, this is who can come and this is who can't come, but for students to understand this is what anti-Semitism is and this is what anti-Semitism is not. I hope.
Can you hear us now? Sorry. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Ken?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah. So actually, it's a good point to go back to you for a moment. You were the lead drafter, actually, I think, of the IRA definition, but you oppose the use of it on campus, on university campus. Can you explain that for briefly?
Well, sure. And so, you know, as I mentioned in some of my remarks, I mean, one of the first things I did at AJC was looking at issues of how campus should deal with issues of bigotry, including anti-Semitism. And, you know, there are many more reasons that I have in the book than I articulated, but basically the idea of having a functional speech code is a problem. You know, for all groupthink, it's a top-down saying what's appropriate. You know, it's a problem. It was never intended to do that. It was intended primarily for data collectors. It was intended for, you know, some diplomatic purposes, and intended to give some clarity on hate crime. But it's been used not for those things, especially the hate crime aspect, which I thought was really important. It's been used to suppress pro-Palestinian speech. It was used as a complaint against a professor in the UK, or actually a couple of professors, for articles that they had written or speakers that they had invited. That destroys academic freedom. Now, again, as I talked in my remark, I see this, battle on both sides trying to censor each other. But I really worry about the use of law. And then again, all the other things that one wants to do disappear. And let me give you, a final example of the craziness of this. When Trump signed the executive order, Alan Dershowitz and others were there and basically saying this is the best thing that happened to the Jewish people for 2,000 years. But think about the anti-Semitism that we've all witnessed in the last few years. Right? Look at the Tree of Life synagogue massacre. That the person who went in and shot that synagogue up and killed 11 people was propelled in large measure, it seems, by the heated verbiage of Trump and others talking about invaders coming over the border. Right? So the idea that he had to act because there was a meeting at that synagogue that was welcoming to the idea of having refugees was propelled a lot, but not by anything that anybody was saying about Jews. It was propelled by what people were saying about immigrants, and also, in other contexts about Muslims. I'm more worried about how we're in a society that's primed to see an us and a them, and leading to conspiracy theories about we have to have self-defense against these other thems. And when you look historically, those are the drivers of anti-Semitism. So when we look at this narrow thing about what did somebody say about Jews, and is it on this side or is it on that side, especially on a campus, we're missing all these things that are really critical if we're going to combat anti-Semitism in the world today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sophie Balmagia. I am a student here at American University. I am a student of political science and also a minor in Israel studies. You mentioned about the criticisms of Israel and how they're immediately responded to with claims of anti-Semitism. Why do you think this strategy has been used time and time again? And to what extent do you think that there is space to respond? To what extent do you think that, you're able to combat with that narrative?
Thank you. Sorry, we're collecting. We're collecting a few because we're running late.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. My name's Tamara. I'm from Israel, Tel Aviv. My question is for the students mainly, to really just get your opinion. And we know that the anti-Semitism throughout the past year, especially being mostly online and then coming back, has been mainly on social media platforms. We've seen it a lot. And so my question to you is, how do you think the university should deal with anti-Semitism on its social media platforms? Because right now, it's pretty much, whether it's anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian stance, all of them are just being deleted or ignored or not really accounted for. So what do you think about that?
Hello, my name is Lila. I'm a freshman here.
I can't hear you.
Just talk louder.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello. No? Hello? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll talk up. Thank you so much for all speaking today. This has been very fascinating. My name is Lila. So my question is, I've taken a few American Studies courses here at American in my time here, and so far I've collectively not experienced any discussion about Judaism or Jewish identity at all in any of my classes. I can't speak to Palestinian students as well, but I've not heard mention of their experience at all. And when I asked one of my professors why she thought this was, she told me that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is where academics goes to die, and because of that, we won't be talking about the Jewish experience on campus. And I found this response very jarring, and as a Jewish student, I felt that this geopolitical conflict was inhibiting conversations of my identity aside from this conflict on campus. So is this an issue that we should be addressing alongside the conflict on top of the conflict, or are they different issues in themselves? Thank you.
Okay, I'll just respond to Tamara and your as well. First of all, I'm not sure what to do on social media. I think there's a big discussion in terms of online hate and how it should be monitored. Last semester when I worked with the American Jewish Committee, they're very much looking into Section 230, and it's interesting because the Republicans are very much against censorship and against taking down viewpoints, and they point out to Twitter taking down President Trump's platform as like censorship, and then the Democrats are very much like get rid of all online hate, but then how do you define online hate? Is it just incitement to violence, or is it anti-Semitism, racism, anti-LGBTQ, right? And then there's a whole idea of freedom of speech, and are platforms or are they news outlets, right? And so as a student, I can't really tell you. Personally, I don't like seeing anti-Semitism in the comments of American University posts, but once again, without the clarity of a definition, you don't have too much grip in terms of going to the administration saying, hey, take this down, which is unfortunate. In terms of Jewish identity on campus, I felt the same way, especially freshman year in my AUX2 class when we talked about identity, race, and culture, and there was no talk about anti-Semitism. I found that also pretty jarring. And I think that, unfortunately, the Israeli-Palestinian debate gets in the way of talking about Palestinian self-identification, anti-Semitism, Jewish self-identity, and the ways in which we can go, like minority groups, like Jews are a part of a minority, Palestinians are a part of a minority here in America especially, and I think that they get left out of the conversation because professors and universities are afraid to bring that up in the classroom, and obviously I think we can see why, but I don't think that that's an excuse to not bring it up in the classroom and have those insightful debates. And so that's my response. I wish I could give you an answer. It was an issue that I felt as well, but I would encourage you just to bring it up in your class. Talk about how you felt different because you are Jewish, and talk about anti-Semitism because that's the way we get it into the curriculum.
I don't have a lot to offer on that, but on the online thing, I think it's impossible to take down every comment. I mean, it's unfortunate. You look at it and it's disgusting, but what can you do? I think it's impossible. But when it's incitement, I don't mind the government getting involved and doing something. Like if someone is writing something like kill the Jews or kill the Arabs or whatever, the government can do something. The problem with hate speech or whatever in general, it's very hard to define, and then I again don't want the government to like want to mentor whatever I say, because what if the government changes its perspective tomorrow on something, and then it's worse for me.
Ken?
Sure. Okay. So on the social media issue, as both responses have indicated, it's complex. I worry too about the sort of proliferation of hateful things on social media, but I also worry about the government defining what's okay and what isn't. What we're doing at the Bard Center is looking at something a little differently that I think is, the underutilization of social media to fight hatred, not to decide what's going to be allowed to be regulated or what's not. I don't think we're going to have much of an impact on that, but I think it's being underused. I mean, the example that I gave of that neo-Nazi march was an example of how social media could be used. There are other things. If people are interested, email me. I'll tell you more about them. But I think those are the things that may have more application. I'm not sure I fully understood the first question about the claims of anti-Semitism, but let me, from what I think I heard, let me just say that there are, everybody's trying to put it again in a box of one side or the other. So there are times where I think there are claims of anti-Semitism where they're ridiculous because it's not about, the Jewish conspiracy or tropes about Jews or anything like that. It's more about issues about having a different perspective. As much as I find anti-Zionism personally difficult and disturbing, and I'm a Zionist, I admit it, but I understand that one can have a different point of view, and it doesn't come from anti-Semitism. It can come from, different life experiences. And I've seen it on the other side too. I've seen pro-Palestinian folks that are saying that, the Jewish groups are saying that every criticism of Israel is defined as anti-Semitism, which is also wrong. It's not. I mean, so again, I think, what I recommend is embrace the gray areas and the uncertainties, and don't try to look at lines, because each side is trying to define a line way out there in a way that's, I think, not helpful. And finally, the comment about, the teaching and faculty. I mean, it's a thing I really worry about, especially for faculty that are untenured, and there are more and more that are not in tenure track. It's really difficult to get in the crosshairs of this third rail issue unless you have a real thick skin and are willing to, to engage it. It's a lot easier if your PhD is in Jewish studies, teach about the shtetl. No one's going to complain about that. No one's going to, try to sue you. No one's going to bring you up to an administrator. So I think we're losing the ability to have the type of teaching we really need in the Jewish community and on the campus about these issues. And finally, as a reflection of what's happening with the students too. There's this survey or a study that I cite in my book from Stanford, which I think we should find really worrying, which is that for a lot of Jewish students that go to places where Israel-Palestine is a burning issue, and they enter the threshold of the campus, and they're sort of faced with a choice of which side are you on? Are you going to be on our side, or are you going to be traitor, or are you going to, are you going to speak of human rights and Palestinian plight? And the people are saying, if that's the price of admission to Jewish life on the campus, count me out. And I worry about the implications of that. If that's the message we're sending to Jewish students, that you have to be a warrior for Israel or for the Palestinian cause. Your obligation is to your fellow students to learn. You can have passionate views and express them, but don't try to shut yourself off from learning and re-engaging how you think and looking at why you think, how you think, and be prepared to change your mind.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. I think this was really the beginning of a debate. We will continue on campus. Thank you also for your book, which provides an important tool for this discussion. But I really want to thank both of you here on the panel, Khalil and Lindsay. It takes a lot of courage to sit up here and discuss these things, and that's the way I have experienced it in almost my 10 years here at AU as a very civil discourse. I hope we can continue it. Let me say one last word because of the last events we had here. There was a lot. I was approached by so many sides when Mohammed Al-Kurd was supposed to speak on campus, and I think I had had the same position, but I told two messages to different people. Those who didn't want the event to happen on campus, I tried to be an advocate for academic freedom of speech. I think I saw problems in what he said. I saw anti-Semitic tropes in some of the things he said, but I still think this is something that you have to counter by arguments and not by banning it from campus. But I also told my colleagues who co-sponsored it, maybe look exactly whom you're co-sponsoring. The person might speak on campus, but we don't have to put our name under it. That's kind of my position. I look very closely to whom we invite. Some people might not agree, some people might agree, but when I think it is hate speech, I would not co-sponsor it. But I still think that person, it's worse pushing it off campus than speaking on campus, because I think that creates a kind of marcher, it creates kind of a feeling of strength, and that's not what we want. I think we want to have a discourse on campus, and I remember one thing you said, the groups who oppose certain opinions being said on campus, of course, they should be heard too, and that's true for Tzipi Livni too. Groups oppose it, sure. By the way, the same group who brought Al-Kurd wrote a letter to the president of the university wanting to cancel and disinvite our speaker, so that's also not right. So I think we should engage in sometimes listening to opinions which bother us, which are offensive to us, but we should counter them with arguments. That's my view. And to your professor, I'd love to speak to her or him. I think we do have academic classes, excellent academic classes on Israel and the Middle East, on Israelis and Palestinians and others, and we're one of the campuses where we have this discourse, and I think on a quite high academic level. So it's difficult, but it's possible. And thank you all. Also thank you, the audience, for participating and staying so long. And again, thank you, Cam.